The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Queen Camilla made her way toward the grand entrance. World leaders from across the globe were arriving for the most important diplomatic summit of the year. The Queen Consort wore her finest navy blue coat dress, adorned with the family's treasured sapphire brooch. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, and her expression carried the weight of royal responsibility. As she approached the ceremonial entrance where the honor guard stood at attention, something felt different about the atmosphere. The usual precision and respect that accompanied such occasions seemed strained. Queen Camilla had been dealing with mounting pressure from recent media scrutiny about her role in the monarchy, and whispers of disapproval from certain political circles had reached her ears. The Royal Guard, a young man named James Crawford, had been serving the crown for 3 years. He was known for his impeccable record and unwavering dedication to protocol. However, that morning, James had received some disturbing news from home. His younger sister had been diagnosed with a serious illness, and the medical bills were mounting beyond what his family could afford. The stress had been eating away at him for weeks, affecting his sleep and concentration. As Queen Camilla approached, she noticed James shifting slightly from his rigid position. His eyes, which should have been fixed straight ahead, seemed to wander. For a moment their gazes met, and she saw something in his expression that concerned her. Was it disrespect, distraction, or something deeper? The protocol was clear and had been followed for centuries. Royal guards were to remain absolutely still and silent during ceremonial duties, especially when world leaders were present. Any deviation from this standard was considered a serious breach of duty. Queen Camilla had been briefed on the importance of maintaining absolute dignity during this summit, as several nations were watching closely for any signs of weakness or disorder within the British monarchy. As she drew closer, James made a small movement that caught her attention. He had tilted his head slightly and seemed to be looking directly at her rather than maintaining his ceremonial stance. In that moment, Queen Camilla felt a surge of frustration that had been building for months. The constant criticism, the pressure to prove herself worthy of her position, and the weight of representing the crown all converged into a single moment of poor judgment. Without warning, Queen Camilla raised her gloved hand and struck James across the face. The sound echoed through the courtyard like a crack of thunder. The other guards remained frozen in their positions, but their eyes widened in shock. Several palace staff members who witnessed the incident gasped audibly, their hands flying to their mouths in disbelief. James staggered slightly but managed to maintain his footing. His cheek burned with both pain and humiliation. Never in his 3 years of service had he experienced anything like this. The young guard's training kicked in, and he forced himself to return to attention, though his face now bore a red mark that would be visible to everyone present. The timing could not have been worse. President Martinez of Spain was approaching the palace gates, his motorcade just minutes away. The French president's convoy was visible in the distance, and representatives from Germany, Canada, and Australia were already inside the palace preparing for the summit. The world's media had cameras positioned at strategic points around the palace, and while they had not captured the incident directly, several reporters had noticed the commotion. Queen Camilla immediately realized the gravity of what she had done. The color drained from her face as she looked at James, who was struggling to maintain his composure. She wanted to apologize, to explain that the stress had gotten to her, but protocol demanded that she continue with the day's events. Speaking to a guard during a ceremony would be almost as inappropriate as striking him. Lady Margaret Thornfield, the Queen Consort's private secretary, had witnessed the entire incident from her position near the palace steps. Her decades of experience in royal protocol told her that this situation needed immediate damage control. She quickly approached Queen Camilla and whispered urgently in her ear about the approaching world leaders and the need to maintain composure. Meanwhile, James was fighting an internal battle. His military training demanded absolute loyalty and silence, but his human dignity had been wounded in the most public way possible. His thoughts raced between his duty to the crown and his natural desire to defend himself. The other guards around him maintained their positions, but he could sense their shock and sympathy. The palace staff who had witnessed the incident were equally stunned. Some had served the royal family for decades and had never seen such a breach of protocol from a senior royal. Whispers began to spread through the corridors, and several staff members discreetly reached for their phones, though they knew that sharing such information would mean immediate termination and possible legal action. As the first world leader's motorcade pulled through the palace gates, Queen Camilla straightened her shoulders and prepared to fulfill her duties. But the weight of her actions pressed heavily on her conscience. She had not only violated the basic principles of respect and dignity that the monarchy stood for, but she had also potentially created an international incident at the worst possible moment. The sound of approaching vehicles and the formal announcements of arriving dignitaries filled the air, but an uncomfortable tension had settled over the ceremonial area. James continued to stand at attention, the mark on his face serving as a visible reminder of what had transpired. His fellow guards remained professional, but the usual sense of pride and honor that accompanied such occasions had been shattered. Unknown to Queen Camilla, a palace security camera had captured the entire incident. The footage was automatically stored in the Royal Security Archives, where it would normally remain confidential indefinitely. However, the head of palace security, Colonel Harrison, had already been alerted to review the morning's footage due to standard protocol during high-profile visits. The stage was now set for a crisis that would test not only Queen Camilla's character, but also King Charles III's leadership and the very foundations of modern royal protocol. The world leaders were arriving, the media was watching, and a young guard stood silently bearing the mark of a moment that would change everything. President Martinez of Spain was the first world leader to witness the aftermath of the incident. As his limousine pulled up to the ceremonial entrance, his trained diplomatic eye immediately noticed the tension in the air. The usual seamless choreography of royal protocol seemed slightly off, and he could see what appeared to be a red mark on one of the guards' faces. Queen Camilla forced a warm smile as she greeted President Martinez, but her hands trembled slightly as she extended them in welcome. The Spanish president, a veteran of international diplomacy, sensed something was amiss but maintained his professional demeanor. Behind him, his security detail and diplomatic staff also noticed the unusual atmosphere, but remained silent. Inside the palace, King Charles III was putting the finishing touches on his opening remarks for the summit. He had been working tirelessly for months to ensure this gathering would strengthen Britain's relationships with key allies and address pressing global issues. The king had no idea that his wife's actions had just created a potential crisis that could overshadow all his careful preparations. James Crawford continued to stand at his post, though every minute felt like an eternity. The physical pain from the strike had subsided, but the emotional impact was growing stronger. He thought about his sister lying in her hospital bed, fighting for her life, while he stood here humiliated and unable to defend himself. The irony was crushing. He had dedicated his life to serving and protecting the royal family, yet he had just been assaulted by the very person he was sworn to serve. The French president's convoy arrived next, followed quickly by the German chancellor's motorcade. Each arrival brought more witnesses to the tense atmosphere that now surrounded the palace entrance. Queen Camilla maintained her composure admirably, greeting each leader with appropriate warmth and protocol, but those closest to her could see the strain in her eyes. Lady Margaret Thornfield was working frantically behind the scenes. She had already contacted the palace's crisis management team and the head of communications. The challenge was enormous. How do you manage a situation involving the Queen Consort striking a guard while world leaders are arriving for a crucial summit? Every decision made in the next few hours could have far-reaching consequences for the monarchy's reputation. Colonel Harrison, the head of palace security, was reviewing the security footage in his private office. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. The camera had captured everything clearly: Queen Camilla's approach, the brief interaction with James, and the unmistakable moment when she struck him across the face. The colonel knew he had a duty to report this to King Charles immediately, But he also understood the devastating implications of such a report during the most important diplomatic event of the year. Meanwhile, several palace staff members were struggling with their own moral dilemmas. Sarah Mitchell, a young housekeeping supervisor who had witnessed the incident, was torn between her loyalty to the royal family and her sense of justice. She had grown up admiring the monarchy and had considered her job at the palace to be the honor of a lifetime. Now she was questioning everything she believed about the institution she served. The Canadian Prime Minister arrived with great fanfare, bringing with him a delegation of senior officials and business leaders. As Queen Camilla welcomed him, she noticed his aide taking detailed notes of everything he observed. The diplomatic world was small, and she knew that any unusual behavior or breach of protocol would be discussed in private meetings for weeks to come. James was beginning to feel lightheaded. The combination of physical discomfort, emotional distress, and the pressure of maintaining his ceremonial stance was taking its toll. His training had prepared him for many challenges, but nothing had prepared him for being struck by a member of the royal family while on duty. He found himself questioning whether he could continue serving an institution that would allow such treatment of its most loyal servants. The Australian delegation's arrival brought another complication. Ambassador Rebecca Thompson had served in various diplomatic posts around the world and had developed a keen eye for reading situations. She immediately sensed the tension and made a mental note to discuss her observations with her team later. In the world of international diplomacy, every detail mattered, and unusual behavior by royal family members could signal deeper problems within the British government. Queen Camilla was now greeting her 7th world leader of the morning, and the strain was becoming more apparent. Her smile seemed forced, and she had begun speaking more quickly than usual. Several members of the International Press Corps, positioned at a respectful distance, were taking notes on everything they observed. While they had not witnessed the incident directly, they were trained to notice when something was not quite right. Inside the palace, King Charles was being briefed on the day's schedule by his private secretary when his phone rang. It was Colonel Harrison requesting an immediate private meeting. The king's secretary noticed the unusual urgency in the colonel's voice and quickly rearranged the schedule to accommodate the request. Charles assumed it was a routine security briefing related to the visiting world leaders, but the somber tone suggested otherwise. The palace's head of communications, David Sterling, was already fielding calls from various news outlets. Several reporters had noticed unusual activity among the palace staff and were asking questions about security concerns. While none of them knew about the specific incident, the experienced journalists could sense that something significant had occurred. James's fellow guards were maintaining their positions perfectly, but they were all deeply troubled by what they had witnessed. Sergeant Williams, a 20-year veteran of royal service, was particularly affected. He had trained James and considered him to be one of the finest guards he had ever worked with. Seeing such a dedicated young man humiliated in this way went against everything he believed the monarchy should represent. As the final world leader's motorcade approached the palace, Queen Camilla realized that she would soon have to face her husband. King Charles would undoubtedly hear about the incident within hours, if not sooner. She knew that her actions had not only damaged her own reputation, but had potentially created serious problems for the king and the entire royal institution. The incident had occurred less than 2 hours ago, but already the ripple effects were spreading throughout the palace. Staff members were whispering in corridors, security personnel were filing reports, and diplomatic observers were making careful notes. What had started as a moment of poor judgment was rapidly evolving into a crisis that would test the very foundations of royal protocol in modern monarchy. The morning's ceremonial greetings were nearly complete, but the real challenge was just beginning. Soon, King Charles would learn what his wife had done, and his response would determine not only the fate of James Crawford and Queen Camilla, but potentially the future relationship between the monarchy and the people they served. Colonel Harrison stood outside King Charles's private study, holding a secure tablet containing the security footage. His hands were steady, but his mind raced with the implications of what he was about to reveal. In his 30 years of royal service, he had never faced a situation quite like this. The colonel knocked twice on the heavy oak door and waited for permission to enter. King Charles looked up from his papers as Colonel Harrison entered. The king immediately noticed the grave expression on his security chief's face. "Colonel, you look as though you're about to deliver rather serious news. I hope it's not a security threat with all our guests arriving." "Your Majesty, I'm afraid it concerns the Queen Consort," Colonel Harrison began carefully. "There has been an incident during this morning's ceremonial greetings that requires your immediate attention." The king set down his pen and gave the colonel his full attention. "What sort of incident? Is Camilla all right?" Colonel Harrison activated the tablet and turned it toward the king. "Sir, I believe it's best if you see for yourself. This footage was captured by our security cameras approximately 2 hours ago." King Charles watched in stunned silence as the scene unfolded on the screen. He saw his wife approach the guard, witnessed the brief moment of eye contact, and then watched in disbelief as she struck James across the face. The king's expression transformed from confusion to shock to deep concern as he absorbed what he was seeing. "My God," the king whispered, replaying the footage. "This actually happened this morning, with world leaders arriving?" "Yes, Your Majesty. The guard in question is James Crawford, a decorated member of our ceremonial unit with an exemplary service record. Multiple palace staff witnessed the incident, and I have their preliminary statements ready for your review." King Charles stood and walked to the window overlooking the courtyard where the incident had occurred. He could see the very spot where his wife had lost her composure, and the weight of the situation settled heavily on his shoulders. As king, he had to consider not only the personal implications for his family, but also the potential impact on the monarchy's reputation and Britain's international relationships. "Has anyone else seen this footage?" the king asked, his voice tight with concern. "Only myself and the senior security technician who alerted me to review it. The footage remains classified under standard royal security protocols, but Your Majesty, we cannot ignore the fact that numerous palace staff witnessed the incident directly." The king returned to his desk and sat down heavily. "What's the current status of the guard who was struck?" "Guard Crawford remains at his post, sir. He has maintained perfect protocol throughout the morning despite the circumstances. However, several staff members have expressed concern about his welfare. The mark from the strike was visible to arriving world leaders." King Charles felt a mixture of anger, disappointment, and protective instinct toward both his wife and his guard. He understood the pressures Camilla had been under, but striking a loyal servant was completely unacceptable. At the same time, he knew that James Crawford deserved justice and support from the crown he served so faithfully. "Colonel, I want you to quietly relieve Guard Crawford from his duties for the remainder of the day. Tell him it's at my personal request and that I will speak with him privately this afternoon. Ensure he receives immediate medical attention and assign someone to look after his welfare." "Yes, Your Majesty. What would you like me to tell the other staff members who witnessed the incident?" The king considered this carefully. "For now, remind them of their confidentiality agreements and the serious legal implications of sharing any information about royal family activities with outsiders. But Colonel, I want to be clear. I will not ask anyone to lie or cover up what happened. We will handle this properly." Meanwhile, in the palace's east wing, Queen Camilla was struggling to focus on her duties as hostess to the world leaders. The morning's formal greetings had concluded, and the international delegations were now settling into their private meetings. She found herself constantly replaying the incident in her mind, each time feeling a deeper sense of shame and regret. Lady Margaret approached the Queen Consort with updates on the day's schedule, but she could see that her employer was deeply distressed. "Ma'am, perhaps you might wish to take a brief moment to compose yourself before the luncheon reception?" Queen Camilla nodded gratefully. "Margaret, what have you heard about the guard? Is he all right?" "Ma'am, I believe it would be best if you discuss this matter directly with His Majesty. The situation requires careful handling." Back in the king's study, Colonel Harrison was providing more details about James Crawford's background. "Your Majesty, I should mention that Guard Crawford has been dealing with a significant family crisis. His sister is seriously ill, and the family is facing substantial medical expenses. This information doesn't excuse any perceived breach of protocol, but it may explain why he seemed distracted this morning. King Charles absorbed this information with growing concern. The guard hadn't been disrespectful or neglectful. He had been a young man worried about his dying sister. The injustice of the situation became even more apparent, and the king felt a surge of protective anger toward his loyal servant. "Colonel, I want you to arrange for the royal household's medical fund to cover all expenses related to Guard Crawford's sister's treatment. Do this immediately and discreetly. Also, please prepare a comprehensive report on Guard Crawford's service record. I want to understand exactly who we're dealing with." "Certainly, Your Majesty. There's one more matter. Several international diplomatic security teams have noted unusual tension among our staff this morning. While they don't know the specific details, they're asking routine questions about palace security protocols." The king realized that the incident was creating ripple effects beyond the palace walls. International security teams were trained to notice when something was amiss, and any perceived weakness or instability in the British monarchy could have diplomatic consequences. "Have any members of the press made inquiries?" "Not yet, sir, but our communications team is monitoring the situation closely. David Sterling believes we should prepare a response strategy in case the story emerges publicly." King Charles stood, again, and began pacing. "This is exactly the kind of crisis that could overshadow everything we've worked to achieve with this summit. These world leaders are here to discuss crucial international issues, and instead, they're witnessing palace drama." The king's private secretary knocked and entered. "Your Majesty, the Queen Consort has requested a private audience at your earliest convenience." "Tell her I'll see her in 10 minutes, the king replied. "Colonel, please begin implementing the measures we discussed regarding Guard Crawford. I want him to know that his loyalty and service are valued by the crown, regardless of what happened this morning." As Colonel Harrison left to carry out his orders, King Charles prepared to confront his wife about her actions. He knew this conversation would be one of the most difficult of their marriage, but as king he had a duty to ensure that justice was served and that the dignity of the monarchy was maintained. The weight of leadership had never felt heavier as he contemplated how to balance his roles as husband, king, and protector of both his family and his subjects. The next few hours would test not only his judgment, but also his ability to lead the royal institution through one of its most challenging moments. Queen Camilla entered her husband's study with visible apprehension. Her usual confident demeanor had been replaced by obvious distress, and King Charles could see that she was struggling with the weight of her actions. She closed the door behind her and stood uncertainly near the entrance, as if unsure whether she was welcome to come closer. "Camilla, please sit down," the king said gently, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Despite his disappointment and anger about the situation, Charles could see that his wife was genuinely tormented by what she had done. "Charles, I need to tell you about something that happened this morning," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I've made a terrible mistake, and I'm afraid it may have serious consequences for all of us." "I already know, my dear," the king replied quietly. "Colonel Harrison showed me the security footage. I've seen exactly what happened with Guard Crawford." Queen Camilla's face went pale. She had hoped to control the narrative by confessing first, but now she realized that the full truth was already known. "Oh God, Charles, I don't know what came over me. The pressure, the constant criticism, the feeling that I'm never good enough for this role. It all just exploded in that moment." King Charles studied his wife's face carefully. He could see genuine remorse there, but he also knew that explanations could not undo the harm that had been done. "Camilla, you struck a loyal servant of the crown, a young man who has dedicated his life to protecting our family. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done?" Tears began to form in Queen Camilla's eyes. "I know there's no excuse for my behavior. The moment I did it, I knew I had crossed a line that should never be crossed. But Charles, I don't know how to fix this. We have world leaders here. The media is watching everything, and I've potentially created an international incident." The king leaned back in his chair, considering his response carefully. "Tell me about your state of mind this morning. Help me understand what led to this moment." Queen Camilla took a shaky breath. I've been struggling, Charles. More than I've let on. The newspapers have been particularly cruel lately, questioning my worthiness, my background, my right to stand beside you. Last night I read several articles that were so vicious, so personal that I barely slept. This morning I felt like I was walking into another performance where I had to prove myself worthy of the crown. And the guard? James Crawford. What? Did he do that triggered your reaction? That's the worst part, Queen Camilla admitted, her voice breaking. He didn't really do anything wrong. He looked at me, and for a moment I thought I saw judgment in his eyes. But looking back, I realized he probably just seemed distracted or worried. I projected my own insecurities onto him and reacted in the worst possible way. King Charles felt a wave of sadness for both his wife and his guard. The pressures of royal life had claimed another victim. But this time the consequences extended far beyond personal suffering. Camilla, I need you to understand something. Guard Crawford has been dealing with a family crisis. His sister is dying, and his family is facing financial ruin trying to pay for her treatment. If he seemed distracted this morning, it was because he was worried about losing someone he loves. The revelation hit Queen Camilla like a physical blow. She covered her face with her hands and began to sob. Oh no, Charles, oh no. I struck a man who was suffering, who was worried about his dying sister. What have I become? The king moved around his desk and placed a comforting hand on his wife's shoulder. Despite his anger about the situation, he could see that she was genuinely devastated by the knowledge of what she had done. We need to focus on making this right, Camilla. The question is how we move forward from here. I want to apologize to him immediately, Queen Camilla said, looking up at her husband through her tears. I want to make amends, to help with his sister's medical expenses, to do whatever it takes to show him that this was not representative of who I want to be. That may not be enough, King Charles replied honestly. This incident has been witnessed by multiple staff members, and international security teams have already noticed unusual tension in the palace. We're dealing with potential diplomatic consequences as well as personal ones. Queen Camilla straightened in her chair, trying to compose herself. What do you need me to do? I'll accept whatever consequences are appropriate. I'll issue a public apology if necessary. I'll resign from my royal duties if that's what's best for the monarchy. The king was surprised by his wife's willingness to consider such drastic measures. It showed him that she truly understood the severity of her actions. Let's not make any hasty decisions about your future role. Right now, I need you to continue with today's diplomatic obligations as if nothing has happened. The world leaders need to see stability and unity from the royal family. How can I face them knowing what I've done? Queen Camilla asked. How can I represent the values of the monarchy when I've just violated everything we're supposed to stand for? Because that's what duty requires, the king replied firmly. We both know that royal life sometimes demands that we set aside our personal feelings for the greater good. Today, the greater good is ensuring that these crucial international relationships are not damaged by our personal crisis. There was a soft knock on the door, and the king's private secretary entered. Your Majesty, the German Chancellor has requested a brief private meeting before the afternoon session begins. Also, Guard Crawford has been relieved from duty as you requested, and Colonel Harrison is arranging for his medical evaluation. Thank you. Tell the Chancellor I'll see him in 15 minutes. After the secretary left, King Charles turned back to his wife. Camilla, this afternoon I'm going to meet privately with Guard Crawford. I want to hear his perspective on what happened and ensure he's receiving proper support. May I be present for that meeting? Queen Camilla asked. I think I owe him a direct apology. The king considered this request carefully. I think it's better if I speak with him alone first. He may feel pressured or intimidated if you're present initially. But I do think you'll need to face him eventually and take responsibility for your actions. Queen Camilla nodded, accepting her husband's judgment. Charles, I need you to know that I never intended to hurt anyone. I've always tried to honor the position I've been given, and I'm horrified that I let my personal struggles affect an innocent person. I believe you, my dear, but intentions don't erase consequences. We have a young man who has been humiliated and physically assaulted while serving the crown. We have palace staff who are questioning their loyalty to an institution they thought represented justice and dignity, and we have international observers who may be wondering about the stability of the British monarchy. The weight of these consequences settled over both of them as they sat in silence for a moment. Finally, King Charles spoke again. "We'll get through this, Camilla, but it's going to require complete honesty, genuine accountability, and a commitment to making real amends. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes," Queen Camilla replied without hesitation. "Whatever it takes to make this right, I'm prepared to do it. I just pray that it's not too late to salvage some dignity from this situation." As Queen Camilla left the study to prepare for her continued diplomatic duties, King Charles remained behind to contemplate the most challenging decision of his reign. How do you balance justice for a wronged servant with loyalty to your spouse? How do you protect the monarchy's reputation while ensuring that the truth is acknowledged? These questions would define not only the remainder of this day but potentially the future of his kingship. James Crawford sat in the palace's medical wing, still wearing his ceremonial uniform but feeling completely disconnected from the pride and honor it usually represented. The physician, Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, had examined his face and confirmed that while there was no permanent damage, the emotional trauma was clearly significant. "The physical injury is minor," Dr. Hartwell explained to Colonel Harrison, who had remained present throughout the examination. "But I'm concerned about the psychological impact. Guard Crawford is showing signs of shock and severe stress." James had barely spoken since being relieved from duty. The combination of the morning's humiliation, worry about his sister, and the uncertainty about his future had left him feeling numb. He kept replaying the moment over and over, wondering if he had somehow deserved what happened or if there was something he could have done differently. Colonel Harrison approached James with genuine compassion. "Son, I want you to know that His Majesty is taking this situation very seriously. He's requested a private meeting with you this afternoon, and he wants to ensure you're receiving all the support you need." "Am I in trouble, sir?" James asked quietly. "Did I do something wrong that caused this to happen?" "Absolutely not," the colonel replied firmly. "You have done nothing wrong. Your service record is exemplary, and everyone who witnessed the incident has confirmed that you were maintaining proper protocol. What happened to you was completely inappropriate and unacceptable." Meanwhile, in the palace's diplomatic quarters, the world leaders were beginning to notice subtle signs that something was amiss. The German Chancellor, Dr. Angela Richter, was particularly observant. During her private meeting with King Charles, she had noticed that he seemed more tense than usual, and that several palace staff members appeared unusually subdued. "Your Majesty," Chancellor Richter said diplomatically, "I hope everything is proceeding smoothly with the summit arrangements. I couldn't help but notice some tension among your staff this morning." King Charles maintained his composure while internally cursing the situation. "Chancellor, palace life always involves numerous moving parts, especially during significant events like this summit. I assure you that any minor staff issues will not impact our important discussions." "Of course," the Chancellor replied, though her experienced diplomatic instincts told her there was more to the story. "I simply want to ensure that if there are any concerns affecting the summit, we can address them appropriately." Back in his private study, King Charles was reviewing James Crawford's service file. The young man's record was indeed exemplary. He had received commendations for his dedication, had volunteered for additional duties, and had never received so much as a minor disciplinary note. The file also contained personal information about his family situation, including recent requests for emergency leave to visit his hospitalized sister. The king felt a deep sense of responsibility for what had happened to this loyal young man. As the head of the royal household, Charles knew that every person who served the crown deserved protection and respect, not assault from the very people they had sworn to serve. At 3 p.m., James was escorted to the king's private study. He had changed into civilian clothes at Colonel Harrison's suggestion, partly to help him feel less formal, and partly because his uniform now carried painful associations with the morning's incident. King Charles rose from his desk as James entered, and was struck by how young and vulnerable the guard appeared. Without his ceremonial uniform and rigid military bearing, James looked like what he was, a worried young man dealing with impossible circumstances. Guard Crawford, please sit down, the king said warmly. First, I want you to know that I have seen the security footage of what happened this morning, and I want to apologize to you personally for the completely unacceptable treatment you received while serving the crown. James looked surprised. He had expected to be questioned about his own conduct, not to receive an apology from the king. Your Majesty, I'm not sure what to say. You don't need to say anything right now. I want you to listen to what I have to tell you, and then I'll answer any questions you might have. The king moved to sit in the chair next to James rather than remaining behind his desk, creating a more personal atmosphere. James? May I call you James? What happened to you this morning was wrong. There is no excuse for anyone, regardless of their position, to strike a member of our staff. The fact that it happened while you were serving with honor and dedication makes it even more inexcusable. James felt tears threatening to form in his eyes. After hours of wondering if he had somehow brought this on himself, hearing the king's clear support was overwhelming. Your Majesty, I keep wondering if I did something wrong, if I somehow provoked what happened. I was thinking about my sister, and maybe I wasn't as focused as I should have been. King Charles leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. James, I know about your sister's illness. I know about the financial pressure your family is facing. The fact that you were dealing with such personal trauma while still fulfilling your duties with professionalism speaks to your character, not against it. Sir, I don't know if I can continue serving here after what happened. Every time I put on that uniform, I'll remember the moment when serving the crown brought me humiliation instead of honor. The king nodded, understanding the young man's conflict. I won't pretend to fully understand what you're feeling, but I want you to know that your service has been valued and respected by everyone who matters. One person's inexcusable behavior does not diminish your worth or your contributions. What happens now, Your Majesty? Will this incident be reported? Will there be an investigation? King Charles had been dreading this question because he knew his answer would set the tone for everything that followed. James, I believe in accountability and justice. What happened to you cannot be swept under the rug or ignored. At the same time, I want to handle this in a way that protects your dignity and serves the interests of justice. The king paused, choosing his words carefully. I am prepared to offer you several options. You may request a formal investigation, which would be conducted by senior palace officials and could result in serious consequences for the person who struck you. You may prefer to handle this matter through internal disciplinary channels, which would be less public but still hold the responsible party accountable. Or if you prefer, you may choose to accept a significant compensation package and transfer to a different position where you wouldn't have direct contact with the royal family. James was quiet for a long moment, processing these options. Your Majesty, what I want most is assurance that this will never happen to another guard. I've served here for 3 years because I believed in what the monarchy represents. I want to continue believing in that. King Charles was moved by the young man's response. Despite being wronged, James was thinking about protecting his fellow guards rather than seeking revenge. That speaks volumes about your character, James. And I give you my word that measures will be put in place to ensure this never happens again. There's something else, sir. My sister's medical bills are destroying my family financially. I've been working extra shifts and considering taking a second job, but I'm afraid it might affect my performance here. I don't want to let the crown down, but I also can't let my sister down. The king had been waiting for this moment. James, I've already instructed the royal household's medical fund to cover all expenses related to your sister's treatment. This is not charity. It's the crown's responsibility to support the families of those who serve us faithfully. James stared at the king in disbelief. Your Majesty, That's incredibly generous, but I can't accept such a gift. It wouldn't be right. It's not a gift, James. It's what should have been offered the moment we learned of your family's crisis. Your loyalty and service have earned this support. The king's voice was firm but kind. I want you to focus on your recovery and your family, not on financial stress. The conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. The king's private secretary entered with an urgent message. Your Majesty, the Queen Consort has requested permission to address the palace staff who witnessed this morning's incident. She wishes to take full responsibility and apologize publicly. King Charles looked at James. What are your thoughts about this? Would you be comfortable with the Queen Consort addressing what happened? James considered carefully. Sir, if she's genuinely sorry and wants to make things right, then I think that would be appropriate. But I need to know that this is about making real changes, not just managing the situation. I understand completely, the king replied. James, I want you to take the rest of the week off to be with your family. Colonel Harrison will handle all the details regarding your sister's medical care. When you're ready to return, we'll discuss your future role here and ensure you're placed in a position where you feel valued and respected. As James prepared to leave, he turned back to the king. Your Majesty, despite everything that happened, I still believe in the monarchy. I hope that my service can continue to mean something positive. It does mean something, James. More than you know. After James left, King Charles sat alone in his study, contemplating the weight of the decisions he had made, he had chosen to support. The following morning dawned gray and somber over Buckingham Palace. Queen Camilla had barely slept, spending most of the night rehearsing what she would say to the palace staff. She understood that her words today would either begin the process of rebuilding trust or cement her reputation as someone unworthy of the crown she wore. In the palace's main conference room, 15 staff members who had witnessed the previous day's incident gathered nervously. Among them were housekeeping supervisors, security personnel, kitchen staff, and ceremonial coordinators. These were people who had dedicated years, sometimes decades, of their lives to serving the royal family with loyalty and discretion. Sarah Mitchell, the young housekeeping supervisor, sat quietly in the back row, still processing what she had seen. She had grown up in a working-class family that revered the monarchy, and yesterday's incident had shaken her fundamental beliefs about the institution she served. Several of her colleagues shared similar feelings of confusion and disappointment. King Charles entered the room first, his presence immediately commanding attention and respect. The staff members rose in unison, but he gestured for them to remain seated. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for gathering this morning. What you witnessed yesterday was completely unacceptable, and you deserve a full explanation and apology. The king's direct approach surprised many in the room. They had expected carefully crafted statements and diplomatic language, not the raw honesty they were hearing. Before the Queen Consort addresses you, I want to make something absolutely clear. What happened to Guard Crawford was wrong, and it does not represent the values or standards that this royal household stands for. Queen Camilla entered the room, looking visibly nervous but determined. She had chosen to wear a simple black dress without jewelry or royal insignia, wanting to appear as humble and approachable as possible. The contrast between her usual regal presence and this subdued appearance was striking. I asked for this meeting because I owe each of you a direct and personal apology. Queen Camilla began, her voice steady despite her obvious emotions. Yesterday morning, I lost control of myself and struck a loyal member of our staff while he was serving the crown with honor and dedication. The room was absolutely silent as she continued. There is no excuse for my behavior. Not the pressures of royal life, not personal stress, not any external circumstances. I violated the basic principles of respect and dignity that should define how members of the royal family treat those who serve us. Several staff members exchanged glances, surprised by the Queen's direct acknowledgement of her actions. Many had expected a more diplomatic explanation that minimized her responsibility. I want you to know that Guard Crawford did nothing wrong. He was professional, appropriate, and dedicated to his duties. My actions toward him were the result of my own failings, not any shortcoming on his part. Queen Camilla's voice began to waver slightly, but she maintained her composure. Sarah Mitchell found herself unexpectedly moved by the Queen's obvious sincerity. While the apology couldn't erase what had happened, it was clear that Queen Camilla understood the gravity of her actions and was genuinely remorseful. I also want to address the position this has put all of you in, the Queen continued. You came to work yesterday expecting to serve with pride and dignity. and instead you were forced to witness something that challenged your faith in the institution you serve. For that, I am deeply sorry." King Charles stepped forward. "The Queen consort will be taking immediate steps to make amends for her actions. Additionally, I am implementing new protocols to ensure that any future grievances between royal family members and staff are handled through proper channels with appropriate oversight." One of the senior staff members, a man who had served the royal family for over 20 years, raised his hand tentatively. "Your Majesty, may we ask about Guard Crawford's welfare? Many of us are concerned about his well-being." "Guard Crawford is recovering well," the king replied. "His sister's medical expenses are being covered by the royal household, and he will be returning to duty when he feels ready, in a position that recognizes his exemplary service record." Queen Camilla added, "I have requested a private meeting with Guard Crawford to apologize to him directly. I understand that he may not be ready for such a conversation, and I will respect his wishes regarding the timing and circumstances." Another staff member spoke up. "Ma'am, we appreciate your honesty, but many of us are struggling with how to reconcile what we witnessed with our loyalty to the crown. How do we move forward from this?" It was a difficult question that cut to the heart of the crisis. "Queen," Camilla took a deep breath before responding, "I can't tell you how to feel about what happened, and I won't ask you to pretend it didn't occur. What I can tell you is that I am committed to earning back your trust through my actions, not just my words." King Charles addressed the group. "I want to be clear that anyone who feels they cannot continue serving the royal household after this incident will be given full support in finding alternative employment, including excellent references and transition assistance. Your service to the crown should be a source of pride, not conflict." The meeting continued for another 30 minutes with staff members asking questions and expressing their concerns. Both the king and queen answered honestly, even when the questions were uncomfortable or challenging. It was unlike any royal interaction the staff had ever experienced. As the meeting concluded, Queen Camilla made one final statement. "I know that trust once broken is difficult to rebuild. I don't expect immediate forgiveness, and I understand that some of you may never feel the same way about serving this household. What I hope is that my future actions will demonstrate my commitment to the values and principles that the monarchy should represent." In the days that followed, word of the Queen's direct apology and the King's supportive response to Guard Crawford spread throughout the palace. While some staff members remained skeptical, many were impressed by the royal couple's willingness to address the situation honestly rather than covering it up. James Crawford returned to duty the following week, assigned to a prestigious position in the King's personal security detail. His sister's treatment was progressing well thanks to the medical support provided by the royal household. Most importantly, he felt that his dignity had been restored and his service truly valued. The incident never became public knowledge, but its impact on the royal household was profound. New protocols were established for addressing conflicts, staff welfare programs were expanded, and a culture of greater accountability was fostered within the palace walls. Queen Camilla threw herself into charitable work with renewed dedication, particularly focusing on causes related to workers' rights and mental health support. While she could never undo her moment of poor judgment, she was determined to spend the rest of her time as queen consort, proving that people could learn from their mistakes and become better. King Charles's handling of the crisis earned him deep respect from his staff and established him as a monarch who would prioritize justice and dignity over convenience or family loyalty. The young king had faced his first major crisis and emerged with his principles intact. Years later, James Crawford would rise through the ranks to become one of the most respected members of the royal security team. He would often reflect on how a moment of crisis had ultimately strengthened his faith in the monarchy and demonstrated that true leadership means taking responsibility for one's actions, regardless of position or status. The incident became a turning point for the modern monarchy, proving that even ancient institutions could evolve, learn from mistakes, and emerge stronger when guided by principles of justice, accountability, and human dignity.